killed them with your own hands. Did you kill Enrico?
Really?
Yeah, like this.
Rebecca!
This is Resident Evil, and this is Sweet Home. It's a role-playing video game released in 1989. The key connective tissue here is that Resident Evil actually started life as a Sweet Home remake. Thankfully, that project was abandoned, and Capcom decided to make Resident Evil its own franchise. However, the story of why that decision was made only gets more interesting from here. Sweet Home, also known as Mamiya House, is a Japanese horror film directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, released in 1989. The plot of the film centers around a team of documentarians and art restorers who return to the former home of a famous artist with the goal of restoring and documenting his long-lost work. However, once they take up residence within the house, paranormal phenomena start to appear. The crew are plagued by the ghost of the great artist's wife and other surreal and visually arresting supernatural phenomena. There's an extended scene where one of the women on the crew washes her hair in a bathtub and becomes possessed by the spirit of the house. And that's to say nothing of how cool the filmmaking is. This film is pulling from sources as wide and varied as Dario Argento, Fritz Lang, and Lucio Fulci. Sweet Home was Kurosawa's first mainstream Japanese film. Prior to this, he was working in the low-budget pink films genre, a trash genre that's one step above softcore and one step below exploitation cinema. The film has a budget, a couple notable actors, and a real sense of style. Specifically, the way the film utilizes shadows and darkness. It's a smart choice to embrace this aspect of the creepy old house genre, because let's be real, the budget of this movie wasn't that big, and the more you can hide in the shadows, the better. Time to release with the movie, Sweet Home the video game was developed by Capcom. It's now looked back on as a seminal game in the survivor horror genre. At the time, the game was just a low-rent movie tie-in product, but the fact that it over-delivered on the premise and also served as the key inspiration to some things we're going to talk about shortly has caused this game to be retroactively reevaluated as a classic. A horror RPG, Sweet Home is pretty similar to the movie it's adapting, but it lacks one key element, the ambiance. Sure, the movie and the game are both set within a mansion. Yes, you walk from room to room, switching between the 5 playable characters, and each of these characters brings a unique item. A lockpick, vacuum cleaner, medical kit, lighter, or camera. And it's up to you to know which of these characters and their corresponding utensil will help you solve the puzzle of any given area. But the majority of the game just doesn't have the same vibe as the movie, the creeping dread and oppressive atmosphere. That is, until you get to key sequences where undead creatures and ghastly artwork instantly propels you into a completely other narrative landscape. It's fantastic. The game was directed by Takuro Fujiwara, who was hot off Ghosts and Goblins, Mega Man 2, and Commando. Fujiwara supposedly worked closely with the film's director Kiyoshi Kurosawa when developing the game, even going so far as to visit him on set. During their collaboration, Kurosawa explicitly told him not to hold himself to the events of the movie. He wanted Fujiwara to make something that was unique to the gaming medium. This was a pretty wild departure from the dogma of how things were done in Japan at the time. It's even a pretty wild swing when looking at how things are done now. Look at how long-running anime adaptations build their projects. They're almost always extremely faithful to how the original manga handled the story. Granted, the Japanese film industry doesn't value live action projects as much as animated ones, but still. It's pretty forward-thinking for Kurosawa to realize the importance of pushing each medium to be its own thing. Released on December 15, 1989, the game accrued a moderate amount of success. Could you really ask for much more though? It's a low-budget horror movie from a director that wasn't a big name with a cast whose biggest star was a moderately well-known pop singer. And yet, much like a dark, grisly thing that goes bump in the night, you couldn't keep this game down. There was something unique about it that just kept coming back for more. The unique artwork, the intricate gameplay, even the fact that the maps were sometimes only able to be illuminated by torchlight. These were all big steps forward for the genre. And it would be the departure from this norm that would stick in the minds of a few key people. Sometimes it's not about building a fan base of millions, it's about building a fan base of the perfect select few individuals. Most notably, Shinji Mikami. Mikami was tasked with directing a remake of Sweet Home in the mid-90s as the game was amassing a large cult following. Capcom quickly realized there was more to be mined from the potential of this tie-in project, and with Fujiwara signed on as a producer, development began in earnest. They quickly set about attempting to accomplish the things that the initial development period for Sweet Home had not allowed. They wanted more atmosphere, more genuine horror, and more cinematic visuals. As they quickly progressed through the development cycle, they realized they had a few key stumbling blocks. The rights to certain key plot and visual elements of Sweet Home had lapsed, and the rights holders would not be pleased with some of the more aggressive horror-themed imagery that Capcom was now pursuing. Therefore, the editorial call was made to switch up the project from being a literal remake into being a new project that was influenced by Sweet Home, a reimagining, if you will, and thus, Resident Evil was born. Sure, you had the old dark house aesthetic, the endless maze of hallways, and the puzzle solving, but now there was more. More creepy music, more narrative immersion, more people made of polygons that at the time you were convinced looked shockingly real, but now you don't really at all. The emphasis on survival, the management of inventory, items, and the difficulty of creeping through the vast shadowy environments are on display in both games. But Resident Evil really is what most artists aspire to when they agree to a project like this. You're able to truly evolve the original game into something wildly new and inventive. Granted, only one of these games has the graphics to really make it scary, but for its time, Sweet Home was striving for these exact outcomes. They just didn't have the technology or creative leeway to make it happen. They were serving multiple masters, technological limitations, and hardware that just couldn't facilitate the vision. However, just a few short years later, you're in a whole new world. Obviously, both of these games feel wildly different, not just because of the graphics, but also because Resident Evil, early in the development process, had made the daring choice to reposition things from a top-down camera to a first-person perspective. Yeah, that's right. The original idea was to make the whole game first-person. Obviously, this too changed and was altered to a third-person perspective. But part of why the game has the aura that it does is because the game was constructed with that experiential feeling front and center. Walking through dimly lit corridors as a first-person experience is a truly harrowing experience. And the game tried to maintain that structure and how they built out the rest of the gameplay even after the first-person experience had been jettisoned. We all know the story from here. Resident Evil, or Biohazard as it was released in Japan, became one of the biggest video game franchises of all time. Its characters became household names, and it spawned its own movie series, which have next to nothing to do with the games, their aesthetics, or characters. A cruel dramatic irony that is appropriate when thinking about the humble origins of the game itself. Claire Redfield, Leon Kennedy, and Nemesis, they're all global icons now, and none of that would have happened without Sweet Home. It just goes to show you how important it is to really push against the confines of what's possible when you're given a creative assignment. A licensed tie-in game for a film that's not going to be seen by many people? That doesn't sound like a project that's really going to be anything particularly creatively fulfilling. And yet, here we are, all these years later, not only discussing the wildly inventive things it accomplished, but its gargantuan wake of influence. It's so amazing that this little project to remaster a cult classic took the creative bare bones of that project and created a property that has brought joy and terror to literally millions of people for close to 2 decades. That's all we have for this episode of Nerdstalgic Gaming. What do you think? Is there another story like this about an aborted remake that has an even bigger impact on gaming history? Or are you a secret lover of the Sweet Home movie? Let us know in the comments below, and of course, as always, please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos just like this one.